It's this, as I understand it, within your faith and you indeed as a person, if you saw someone breaking into your neighbour's house and your neighbour was away, first thing you would do is report it to the police, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's true.
And if you received reliable information, and I understand this is hypothetical, you've never been in this position, but if you received reliable information that a murder was planned, the first thing you would do is report it to the police.
That's true.
But if you receive a report that a child has been abused within a family, for example, in your community, you don't report it to the police. Now, can you explain the distinction? Why would that be?
Yeah, I would say again, as I read from the New South Wales booklet, as I strongly believe myself, as the scriptural principles highlight, we respect the rights of the individuals, the family, the survivor in the case of an adult, as in the two cases that have been considered, to make that determination. We've not said that we've had a procedure or process of automatically reporting it to the authorities. The Commission has brought to our attention that there, in addition to mandatory reporting, there are other legal implications to having that information. But I understand your point. Our process has been to respect the rights of the individual or the family, and I think as has been previously quoted from 2 Corinthians 1:24, it says we're not the masters over your faith, we're fellow workers for your joy, and Galatians 6:5 says each of us shall carry our own load of responsibility. So it's been mentioned that we control every aspect of family life. That's not the case. We respect the rights of families to make some of those decisions, but I do understand your point.
Well, is it not the case, Mr. Spinks, that it's because child sexual abuse is regarded as a sin within the Jehovah's Witness faith? It's a very serious sin, I'll grant you that, but it's regarded as a sin, but hasn't been recognised to be a crime.
Well, that's totally wrong. Not only is that printed, that we view child abuse as a sin and a crime. There is no worse sin and crime than child abuse. So I understand the basis for you expressing that, but that is totally the opposite to the truth with Jehovah's Witnesses.
No further questions.
Can you, Mr. Spinks, just help me to understand the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness Church? There are some fairly strict biblical New Testament injunctions about the role of women. Are they adhered to by your church?
I promise to give a short answer, Your Honour. We have such respect for our wives and women. We see scripturally that the role of teaching in the congregation is for the elders, for the men. Who does the bulk of the preaching work and adds the momentum? My wife, the other wives. We have a reputation for showing great respect for our wives. I understand what you're saying in 21st century Australia for a religious or faith-based organisation to say that the men are going to be elders. I understand the challenge, but that's our scriptural stand.
But are you saying to me women can't be teachers in the church?
I think when that was discussed previously, if we're saying, as in a church situation, the priest at the pulpit or whatever, we understand scripturally that's the role of the elders. Are the women involved in teaching, in the public preaching work, in the bulk of the ministry? Yes, they are. They do the bulk of that work, but I'm not trying to...
Are they allowed to speak in the church?
I think anyone who's been to one of our congregation meetings would say a resounding yes to that.
Corinthians says they can't.
The context there is the elder, minister, priest standing up and giving a Bible lecture to the congregation. That's the role of the elders. The women, as with all others, non-elders, amongst the men, our children, they all participate, question and answer, commenting freely, and presentations off the platform.
We'll just look at 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35 for me. Have you departed from the scripture in your current practice?
Not at all, Your Honour. I think
Well, would you read them out so everyone knows what we're talking about?
34 and 35.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, you better start at 33, I suppose.
Okay. It says, for God is a God not of disorder but of peace, as in all the congregations of the holy ones. Let the women keep silent in the congregation, for it is not permitted for them to speak. Rather, let them be in subjection, as the law also says. If they want to learn something, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the congregation.
Well, do you follow that injunction or not?
If we read the whole chapter, I'm not suggesting that we do, but if we read the whole chapter, we'll see that the reason it starts with a God of disorder, not of disorder but of peace, is that there was disruption in the congregation, and the Apostle Paul, who I might mention was a single lawyer, spoke in a language that we would certainly phrase a little differently today. His point was it was the role of the men to stand up and teach God's word from the pulpit, the platform. And so do we try and over-literally interpret that? The Gospels are full of the women doing the preaching and sharing in the work in the congregation. That's just a really strong statement addressing a particular situation.
So you don't follow that one?
We do not have sisters who are elders teaching from the pulpit, but they are actively involved in speaking and discussions and question and answer.
Asking questions. So the answer to my question is you don't follow that injunction?
Well, it's out of context, I'm sorry, Your Honour, because the context is the priest preaching from the pulpit.
All right.
Just on that, I think the transcript may have picked up the wrong reference. Is it 1 Corinthians 14?
No, I've lost it now.
I think the verses were wrong, 34 and 35.
33, 34 and 35.
Chapter 14.
14, yeah.
Thank you.
33, 34 and 35. I mean, there are other references in a similar vein, and you've probably travelled this territory many times, haven't you? Because, as you know, many churches don't interpret and apply those injunctions in the literal way that your church does.
That's correct.
You know that?
I do.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I do, Your Honour, if I may.
Well, who goes first?
All right, I do, I think.
All right. Okay, Ms McGlinchey.
Mr Spinks, my name is Miss McGlinchey and I represent Monty Baker in these proceedings. Mr Spinks, can I just ask, does the Jehovah's Witness Church conduct children's activities such as Sunday school or Bible classes for children?
No.
They don't?
No.
They don't have any child activities?
No.
Even creches?
No.
Childcare centres, anything like that?
No.
All right. So there's no activity where children are supervised alone with a Jehovah's Witness volunteer?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr Spinks, could you look at your first statement, paragraph 66? Just want to ask you some questions about the role of the regular pioneers. Now, as I understand it from the viewpoint of a lay person, a regular pioneer preaches in the community, in public. Is that correct?
Yeah, all of Jehovah's Witnesses preach publicly in the community. A regular pioneer is someone that says, I want to expand my ministry, but what you say is correct, yeah.
So they, the regular pioneers, may preach in a public place, such as a shopping centre or something like that?
Yes.
All right. That they also go door to door and knocking
Yes.
on people's doors and attempting to engage people in conversation and to communicate to them your understanding of the world. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Or Jehovah's understanding of the world?
Yes.
Right. And that may also involve going back on a number of occasions and taking part in family discussions and returning to the home and being invited into the home. Is that correct?
Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses conduct Bible studies with people, yes.
All right. I'm talking now in particular about the role of the regular pioneer, not generally. Do you understand that?
Sure.
Okay. Now, there is, and as I understand it, the regular pioneer strategy, for want of a better word, has been quite successful in growing the flock around the world.
I don't know how to quantify that. I guess I have no reason to question it. I guess a missionary, a special pioneer, regular pioneer is by nature going to spend more time in the preaching work.
All right. Now, there is an application to become a regular pioneer. You can't just decide yourself that you're a regular pioneer. You need to go through a process. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, anyone can expand their ministry, but as a regular pioneer, that's right, there's an application.
And that application form is attached to your first statement.
That's correct.
Could we look at that, please? Do you have that in front of you?
I do.
All right. Now, there are a number of questions that the applicant is asked about their that would be considered in whether they're an appropriate person or not. In the question 6, number C, you ask, have you ever engaged in child sexual molestation?
Yes.
All right, okay. Now, the next one, D, if yes, when? Correct?
Correct.
All right. So you would be expecting a person to disclose that to you and you would ask further questions, such as when?
That's correct.
All right. And the next question is, are you now of good moral standing and habits? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. Now, would I be right in assuming that a person who does declare that they have engaged in child sexual molestation, if they are now a person of good moral standing and habits, would not be necessarily prohibited from taking on the role of regular pioneer? Is that correct?
I'm just trying to unravel the question there, but
Right.
I think if in question 6 there are a whole list of things, and
Yes.
the following question in 7, are you now of good moral standing and habits? If your question is if somebody says, yes, I engaged in child sexual molestation, that consideration would then be given as to whether they would be allowed to regular pioneer.
All right.
That's if they honestly answered the question, of course.
Of course, but we're only dealing with if they say yes. So, answering yes to that question would not prohibit you from taking part in being a regular pioneer.
The short answer is yes, it would. The longer answer is, depending on the circumstances, as we've openly provided information, so perhaps if it was decades ago, I don't want to say anything to minimise or compare the nature of offences, but we deal with situations where perhaps a very immature 22-year-old is involved with a mature 16-year-old. They might even end up marrying or whatever, but there are situations where by definition it's child sexual molestation. We don't want to condone a child abuser by allowing them to, as the Organised to Accomplish God's Will book says, they should be exemplary and known to be exemplary.
All right. So if a person says yes, but they also say they are now of good moral standing and habits, what further inquiries do you make?
The elders are instructed. There is a letter, by the way, it's in the submission or in the tender documents. I believe it's July 2014, thereabouts, that actually sets out the process. So the elders would then get all the details of that and write to the branch office. So it would be held up at that point. As soon as the, remembering that this is the document that's given to the applicant,
Yes.
as soon as that person puts yes to question C, yes, the application is held up, and then we'd start that process of discussing with the branch office what details are known about that.
All right. And are there a set of guidelines that you would use that in assessing that, or would it just be the judgment of the elders?
No, they contact the branch office. So the full
branch
details are provided to the branch office. The principles of the S66 guidelines that have been just looked at before, and the Bible principles, the same is applied in this situation.
All right. Is there any external checks that you would undertake? And by external, I mean, for example, a police records check. Would you seek one of those?
I think as we've in our documents show that where working with children check is required for ministers, I think there's about 7,000 now, but for a regular pioneer, we have no requirement at this stage that's the case.
Right. Can I just get you to address your mind to a situation which I'm suggesting of a person has said yes, but they've also, to that question that they have engaged in child sexual molestation, they're also saying that they're now of moral standing, good moral standing and habits. And I understand that there's a process with head office, but would you, in that circumstance, seek any external tests for that, such as a criminal records history?
I think we've...
Is that the answer no?
The answer is no.
All right. Would, in that circumstance, you require a person to provide a working with children check?
That's not been the case.
So the answer is no.
Correct.
All right. Are there any criminal matters which, simply by having a record of that criminal matter, such as rape, that would in every case exclude you from being accredited as a regular pioneer?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Sure. All right. Are there any offences, such as rape, that would in every case exclude you from taking up a position as a regular pioneer?
I think for me to give a... You've asked an absolute question there.
I have.
So my answer is for the reasons I explained earlier. I don't think I could say absolutely that 20, 30, 40 years down the track on some specific situations. The question is too absolute and hypothetical, so I can't answer in the positive.
All right. Okay, so the answer is either no or you don't know.
I think the answer is... I'm not suggesting you asked a question and I've not answered in the affirmative. I think if we had the specific circumstances, the short answer is no. There is no absolute, if that's the answer you're looking for.
All right. Does the church undergo any kind of risk assessment process where you look at the activities you're involved in and apply a process by which you assess both the risk to your own people and the risk to the community that your own people may present to them, such as being present in their homes?
If you're asking about have we engaged or done an external risk assessment, I don't know.
Do you recognise that it may, in some circumstances, be a risk to the public sending out people into people's homes who may have previous criminal histories for violent offences, say?
I think that's a valid question that applies across the community in every walk of life.
Mr. Spinks, I'm not asking you about across the community. I'm asking you about Jehovah's Witness practices.
Again, your question is fairly sweeping, and I think it does apply to the broad community. Are you saying is there a risk in any case of somebody who has committed a sin or a crime in their past being some risk to the public I'd have to say absolutely yes with Jehovah's Witnesses or any other organisation or individual.
All right. Could I ask you to look at paragraph 73 of your first statement about elders? Mr. Spinks, you set out in that statement, if that could be brought up. All right, I think I've got it anyway. There are a number of considerations and characteristics of a person, of a man, before they can become an elder. And I think the number 6 is presiding over his own household in a fine manner. Now, that comes from Timothy 3:2, but it's not a complete stating of what Timothy says on that point, is it?
Can I read it in context?
Yes, of course.
So it's an open expression in the middle of a series of verses. That's what was your question?
All right. Timothy 2 says, in describing the characteristics of an overseer or an elder, a man presiding over his own household in a fine manner, as you've stated, and then there is a comma and it says, having his children in subjection with all seriousness. What does that mean to you?
What does having your children in subjection
mean?
I would suggest exactly as it says, that I don't think any caring parent would see it otherwise, that children are subject to the care and authority of their parents. I wouldn't imagine that any of us as kind, loving parents would see it any other way.
Well, it doesn't say kind, loving parents. It says having children under the subjection of the father.
I think
it's a very strong word.
Well, I think it's out of context, because if you read on to verse 5, makes the application of it where it says, and don't miss the word in the middle of it, for if any man does not know how to preside over his own household, how will he care for the congregation of God? The point is, if a man has unruly children who don't obey the parents' instructions, don't cross the road, don't take drugs, then if a man does not have the capacity to have his own family in a loving setting, then how can he do that for the congregation? So I personally would just be a little cautious about reading into that a manner or that's just totally not in harmony with the scripture. For myself, I would say that.
All right. To me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the word subjection implies power and control, perhaps excessive power and control.
Well, I don't know what sort of family I think you're referring to there, but certainly not the case in my family. I like to think that my son, who's turned out to be a beautiful adult, was subject to me when I told him don't take drugs and don't get mixed up in the wrong crowd. And if that's subjection, I'll accept it and be happy to continue.
Well, BCG has given evidence about being under the excessive control and power of her father, who was an elder.
Again, you probably need to be cautious to make sure that we stick with the facts. He wasn't an elder, so just if you could be cautious with that.
I'm sorry, if that's correct.
Apology accepted. In addition...
He was a ministerial...
Thank you. In addition, if anybody in this commission or anybody of the thousands in Australia that are listening in and think that BCG's father was anything but a tyrant, some horrific recollections that she makes has nothing to do with all the kindly families in the broader community, he treated her in a diabolical manner, and I've no excuse for what he did. I'm just grateful that he's ultimately felt the consequences of that, and what BCG says she has every right to say, and we've no question over that.
Would you agree, or if this is within your knowledge, that the idea that children should be under the subjection of their fathers is, in the wider community, a very old-fashioned concept?
I'm shocked to hear you say it. It's all I can say, and I apologise. I'm shocked to hear you say it, because I don't think there would be a parent, and I've got 2 beautiful grandchildren who I would take the same approach with, and I love them to pieces, would expect that you're going to let your child run on the street because you don't have that measure of authority until they become of an age where they can make good moral decisions. So if your suggestion is that parents should have no authority in relation to their children...
Well, I think, I'm not making that suggestion.
Well, I'm struggling with the word subjection being misapplied.
Right. Well, you are biblical literalists, and that's what's in the Bible. It doesn't say loving authority, it doesn't say care, it says subjection. The point that I'm trying to make, and I'll get to it a little bit quicker, is that do you think that by following biblical structures such as that perhaps children would not feel able to make complaints about their fathers if their father is the source of abuse, or to make complaints generally?
I think it's, with respect, please don't think I'm contending with you. You're expressing viewpoints and I'm expressing mine back.
No, I'm asking...
It's such a broad, sweeping, ill-informed comment that what you're doing is taking a tyrant of a man who's been to prison, that we won't let back into our congregation, who mistreated his daughter, and insinuating that loving...
Mr. Spinks, I think the question's being put to you generally, not specifically. We had this difficulty before. Can you answer it in the general, which is what's being put to you, rightly or wrongly, is that by using the word subjection and creating a relationship of subjection, there's a real risk that a child will feel unable to complain about the actions of their father. Now, I have to tell you that I can understand the proposition. Is there an answer to it?
Again, Your Honour, I just invite anyone to visit our families. I can say no more than that. Just meet the families, see Jehovah's Witnesses. That's not the way. Was BCG's father, are some fathers like that way in the community generally? Absolutely, and I loathe it. But Jehovah's Witnesses love their children, support them, care for them. I understand the point, and if parents are authoritarian with their children or subject their children to unloving conduct, then I reject that and I loathe it.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Anyone else? Sorry?
Oh, you could.
I heard a voice.
I have a few questions.
Yes, very well.
Mr. Spinks, my name is Gallagher and I represent BCB. Are you aware of BCB's experience with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yes, I heard her testimony.
And you would know, wouldn't you, that she was involved in a situation where the abuser was brought to her home with 2 elders. Of course, that is something that, are you saying now, would probably not occur?
I'm certain it wouldn't. The fact that she was 22 years of age is irrelevant. I think it was an inappropriate setting, yes.
Ms. Gallagher, can you just bring that microphone so that everyone at home can hear you?
A moment.
It'll move.
Now it's moved. Sorry, I beg your pardon. And so you're aware, aren't you? Did you watch her evidence or listen to her evidence?
Yes, I listened to it, yes.
Right. So you're aware that she and her husband, who was fairly young at the time, both handed themselves over to the elders in the sense of trusting them with the process?
Yes, I understand that.
And the process, and this is unsatisfactory, I think you'd agree, was not explained to her or her husband?
I understand that. I have no reason to question what she said. I accept what she said.
And of course, that's an unsatisfactory turn of events for them, in the sense that the process of the inquiry, the investigation, wasn't explained.
Certainly that's her recollection. I have no reason to question it, and it wasn't a good setting.
No. So you agree it's unsatisfactory?
That was at that time, absolutely.
Yes. As it stands now, just as to practicalities, if a young child comes forward, or there's complaint from a young child, of course they would not face their abuser. Is that so?
That's correct.
All right. So there's a statement, or the allegation will be put in writing in some way. Is that right?
That can be the case, yes.
Would that allegation be taken by an elder?
It can be the parents. I think there's several examples of that in the case files that you may have read.
No, I haven't.
It's in the case files. Yeah.
Right. So what if a parent were an alleged abuser? What would be the situation?
Then it would need to be the guardian parent or whoever the child had come to seek support.
Right. So not an elder.
I think we've made it clear that the statement can be taken by two witnesses. The elders are involved in the process. We've made that clear. Who actually is the best person? And again, I think you'll find in the case files there's some examples where parents have provided that.
I'm just envisaging a situation where a child may still be embarrassed in relaying detail about sexual assaults to them, and may minimise the abuse because of that embarrassment. That's a possibility, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And it's the case, isn't it, that as Mr. Stewart was asking, that if one repents one's conduct, if one is an abuser, then the punishment is reproof. Is that correct?
That's extremely simplified, but if the individual was genuinely repentant, and my experience has been that would generally relate to historical cases. It'd be very difficult for anybody to conclude that somebody who had recently abused a child, it would take an enormous convincing that their repentance could be commensurate with the degree of deviation.
Yes, but certainly if there was a situation, the current process lends itself, doesn't it, to the possibility of the abuse being minimised by the person who's alleging because of the way the statement is taken. That's a possibility, isn't it?
Certainly, it's a possibility.
And that because of the lesser punishment handed out for somebody who repents, then they may indeed confess to harm that they know to be inaccurately conveyed.
I think I've followed you through there, but look, everything you're saying is just plain common sense. I agree with it.
Certainly there's an inducement to confess to wrongdoing, isn't there, in the sense of the punishment is less, one isn't disfellowed.
Disfellowshipped, right.
Disfellowshipped.
Well, again, each situation would be different, but can I suggest that we've seen situations where people don't tell the truth. It happens in all walks of life, and there's no question that that's happened amongst Jehovah's Witnesses. So if somebody doesn't tell the truth, if somebody deceives and covers up what they are, what you say is that can impact on the outcome with Jehovah's Witnesses as it can with any judiciary.
If you might address yourself to my question, that the prospect of lesser punishment, if you like, acts as an inducement to confess to wrongdoing. Do you agree that that's a possibility?
So you're suggesting that somebody could pretend to be confessing and repentant to try and not be disfellowshipped. Is that a possibility? You'd have to say yes.
Just as to another practicality, if an allegation of wrongdoing were sexual misconduct in relation to a child were to come to your knowledge, and the investigative procedure within the church wasn't embarked upon, but the police were called straight away.
Yes.
The investigative procedure within the church would halt at that time, is that
Yes,
so?
and the documents would show that. Yes, that is the case.
And the elder, if it is an elder, would be stood down waiting for the outcome of the police inquiry, is that right?
He's deleted as an elder.
Pending the outcome.
No, he's deleted as an elder. So what you're saying there is if we have an investigation that where there's evidence or confession or whatever, we hold up any further involvement with the individual at the request of the police. We've had experience with that. We respect their role and we step back. But he would be automatically deleted and announced initially.
So but that's not a permanent deletion. Is that so?
No, that's a permanent deletion.
Right. Is that the same as disfellowshipped?
No. No, so I think we're, again, with total respect for everything that's happened, I think we call it deletion. The church may call it, if it happens, defrocking or laicizing or whatever, but where an elder or ministerial servant is involved in child abuse offences, they are immediately defrocked, deleted, but the judicial process of disfellowshipping the person, expelling them, would hold up. We don't want to interfere with the police investigation.
Mr. Spiggs, I'm talking about before the church has conducted any investigation. If the church did not conduct an investigation itself and just immediately called the police, would that person still be deleted?
I think we'd need to, and as you would appreciate, we'd need to verify that there actually is an allegation, but I think would be such a rare situation where the police are dealing with a child abuse allegation and we don't immediately delete the person. And for the reasons of this, remember, we're not talking about paid clergy and pensions and all those sorts of things. We're talking about a volunteer local minister who should not be an elder until the whole matter is resolved and he can be irreprehensible again if it's proved to be a false allegation, which would be rarely the case.
So do you agree that it'd be best practice to, where an allegation is made of child sexual abuse, for the phone to be picked up and the police called and the person deleted until the process has taken its course outside the church?
I think even the police or the authorities would have a little issue with what you're suggesting there, that before an allegation is even established, that an announcement or a deletion is going to take place. But certainly, I think we're probably actually covering the same point from a different perspective. We're not going to leave an elder as an elder where there's a matter involving child abuse.
Where you say the police would have difficulties in proceeding where an allegation hasn't been established, I'm talking about the police establishing whether an allegation... Well, I withdraw that. Ultimately, of course, it might become a matter for a jury to determine whether a matter has been established. Do you understand that proposition?
The person would be immediately deleted. When the police have evidence, whether it fits in with our rules of evidence or otherwise, if an individual is dealt with by the police, he would be immediately deleted as an elder. I may have misunderstood where you're heading with that.
So it would take perhaps the person being charged for the deletion to occur?
Well, again, I need to know the specifics. I don't know of a situation where the police have dealt with somebody for child abuse and we haven't deleted them as an elder.
Just in relation to prevention within the church, I take it that every Jehovah's Witness would be aware and live by the two witness, will certainly be aware of the two witness rule. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I think anybody that reads the Bible or reads our publications, associates with Jehovah's Witnesses, would be aware of the Jehovah's Witnesses know their Bibles pretty well, but whether every person that comes to a Kingdom Hall, I can't comment on that.
All right. So that and of course you'd agree that that sexual assaults, given the nature of the offending, would occur just with two people present generally. Do you agree with that proposition?
I think we've been there, absolutely.
So that creates the perfect protection for an offender. Do you agree with that proposition?
It's a broad sweeping statement, but I think I covered that in saying that we don't have an expectation. It would be naive. We don't have an expectation that there are going to be two witnesses to a child abuse or sexual assault. And I think as I've stepped out, we understand that the two witness Bible requirement relates to just one specific step. I don't want to digress. The October 2012 letter sets it out in detail in paragraph 11 of the process, where even where the allegation is only one witness, the elders take precautions and there are warnings given. So
yes. I think it's noted there, however, even though the elders are not authorised to take congregation action where there is only one witness, the elders should remain vigilant with regard to the conduct and activity of the accused. Certainly, but I'm talking about prevention. I'm talking about moving forward in the sense that the two-witness rule would effectively create a shield for an offender who is part of the church who knows, well, I can do what I want. It's not going to be proved without two witnesses. Do you agree that that's something that might go on in the mind of an offender?
I can't speak for what goes on in the mind of an offender, but
if you could take yourself there.
Well, I'd rather not. But you're hypothesising, and I agree with the hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. You indicate, I think there's a page 15708. You, in answer to a question posed by counsel assisting at about line 16, and this is just in regards to telling parents that they have an absolute right to go to the authorities if they want to. You understand, don't you, in BCV's case, that she wasn't told by the elders that she could go to the police. Are you aware of that?
Well, I
Can
can't...
I make you aware of that? Do you accept that that was her situation?
23 years ago or whatever, I think that's been established that was her testimony. I don't question that.
Yes. The situation now, is it that, if you could clarify, are victims told that they have an absolute right, or do you just leave that to them to work out in accordance with Galatians, forgive me if I'm pronouncing incorrectly?
I'm just not sure that, again, I'm happy to answer the question again, but
I'll withdraw it, I'm sorry. Okay. Galatians says, doesn't it, that basically one must bear one's own load. Is that correct?
Well, and again, I explained that has nothing to do with not telling the individual that they have every right to go to the police. That has everything to do, as I've mentioned.
What is church policy, if I might inquire?
Would I be permitted just to finish that sentence? If not,
I don't want to waste your time or indeed that of the Commission. If I might clarify my question, it could be that I'm just wanting to know what the church policy is now.
I'm happy to repeat it again.
Right.
In every allegation of child abuse, I'd open it and read it again, but I think the Commissioner might get frustrated with me. But in every allegation of child abuse, the elders are informed, reminded, as they've got written there, to make sure that the survivor or victim's family are told that they have the absolute right to deal with it with the authorities, and that the elders will support them in that. So we have repeatedly said that.
And so certainly, and that's at a time when the elders may indeed have established to their own satisfaction that they believe the allegation.
Look, again, for the sake of the Commission, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but the Chapter 12 of the Elders' Handbook, if you recall, specifically says at the time they first hear of the allegation. So there may be no evidence, it may be hearsay. The first thing that they do is contact the branch office, and they are given that advice, and the elders relay that advice. Well,
and are you aware, and His Honour touched upon this, as to knowledge and belief, if some knowledge and or belief as to whether or not a crime has been committed. Are you aware of the gravity of the criminal sanction if one has a knowledge or a belief about a crime having been committed and one doesn't go to the authorities? And I'm talking about the elders.
I think the Commissioner, His Honour, did an outstanding job of making it very clear to me, and I've acknowledged the fact that, well, that's a relatively new understanding to me. I don't claim to understand the law. What I've recognised and humbly accepted is that every individual in New South Wales, and that's something that's going to face elders and our branch office more than every individual, that there is a law there that has a bearing, and I understand that.
Yes, right. Thank you, Your Honour.
Did you hear the evidence of Mr Davies, Queensland?
I did most of it, Your Honour, yes. So,
did you hear his concerns about your processes and the risk to prosecution?
I did. I heard what he said, yes.
Yeah. If someone's accused of a crime, maybe sexual abuse or indeed any other crime, which comes before the elders, that accusation comes before the elders, is the person accused required to answer to the elders?
The elders would never, I may have just missed the first part, but the elders would never, or the policy or procedure is that they would always follow up an allegation.
I understand that, but is the accused required to answer to the elders, answer their questions?
I would say in the congregation setting the answer is yes. Then if the individual failed to do that, it would be difficult for me to understand how we would continue in the congregation, or that the parents or victim wouldn't be encouraged to deal with the matter through another course.
So in order to, as it were, protect him or herself within the setting of the church, the person would be required to answer the questions of the elders, is that right?
I think the clear Proverbs 28 verse 13 says, confess your sins. Is there a scriptural obligation for them to confess their sins? Yes, there is. Could they refuse to do that? I guess the answer would be yes.
What about not confessing your sins but articulating your defence? Would you have to do that?
The accused?
Yeah.
Yes, if there was an allegation against an individual and he refused to answer that allegation, the individual would be disfellowshipped from the congregation ultimately, because again, as the charge of brazen loose conduct is an absolute disregard for the authority and standards, so he would be disfellowshipped if he refused.
Well, it's probably murky territory for you, but do you understand where we've stepped into now in terms of the conflict or potential conflict between your processes and the civil law?
Yeah, I do understand the reasoning and I'm appreciative of it. I acknowledge what you're saying.
What's the answer?
I think we're looking forward to the recommendations of the Commission. We're favourable to mandatory reporting and we're favourable to documenting and addressing our policies wherever we can. That's a pretty sweeping statement, but as I said, we are motivated to do what we can within the scriptures to make sure that we make whatever changes are needed, Your Honour.
Well, you gentlemen will be able to help us on that question too.
Yes, Your Honour.
Mr. Tockley.
Yes, Your Honour. Your Honour, I just have one topic I wish to have some re-examination upon. I'll only be a couple of minutes, I think. Mr. Spinks, my name is Mr. Tockley, as you know. I represent the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia, as well as 3 other persons, including yourself, before this commission. Mr. Spinks, you gave some evidence earlier today about persons who are members of the Jehovah's Witnesses faith, including psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists and welfare workers. Do you remember that answer?
Yes.
Are policemen and women also members of the Jehovah's Witnesses faith?
Yes, there are Jehovah's Witnesses in all various aspects of the police force, yes.
And do you in the service department deal with members of the police force as part of your work?
Yes, we have a good rapport with the police for matters in both directions. Without digressing, we've had extensive dealings with the police in regard to the murder of the High Court judges and the bombing of the Kingdom Hall. So up till 8 o'clock this morning, we have a good relationship with the police force. I had a meeting earlier this morning.
And I take it there is no policy or scriptural reference which requires that the service department or indeed any other Jehovah's Witness not cooperate with the police?
It's exactly the opposite. If I can just be permitted just for one moment to show, because I feel that it's not been clear. It's been referred to, but...
Does Your Honour have any objection to Mr Spinks referring to the... I take it's the Bible you're referring to?
Yeah, just a verse from the Bible, if
We're about to embark upon a complicated question, but go ahead.
I'll make it brief.
You'll run into the problem of if the law is a problem and the police are trying to enforce a law that's a problem for Jehovah's Witness. That's the problem you'll run into.
I think this says the opposite, Your Honour, if I could be permitted to read it.
Yes, but you said what I just said before lunch, but anyway.
Romans chapter 13, if I could just be indulged just to read the verses, because this is our absolute conviction. It says, "Let every person be in subjection to the superior authorities, for there is no authority except by God. The existing authorities stand placed in their relative positions by God. Therefore, whoever opposes the authority has taken a stand against the arrangement of God. Those who have taken a stand against it will bring judgment against themselves." Verse 4 says, "For it is God's minister to you for your good. But if you're doing what is bad, be in fear, for it's not without purpose that it bears the sword. It is God's minister, an avenger to express wrath against the one practising what is bad." So Jehovah's Witnesses have absolute regard for the law in these areas. We want to be law-abiding. If, as has been raised, if there are areas of our processes that are not in harmony with the law in this matter, we will change them. We will make the adjustment. We'll continue to cooperate with the police. We love the police. We want to cooperate with the police. And if there are laws that require us, we will change our arrangements to conform to support the police.
Mr Spinks, it's a complicated question. Before lunch, you rightly pointed out that the Jehovah's Witnesses did not comply with the Nazi obligations, and that's occurred or occurring throughout the world. You can't literally apply that Bible passage to all circumstances, can you?
I read before Acts 5:29 that talks about God as ruler rather than men. If a government, as the Nazis did or as South Korea does, says that I have to go and kill people, then I'll default to God's law and I'll go to prison for the consequences. When the Australian law says you report every case of child abuse regardless of the wishes of the victim, Jehovah's Witnesses will fully comply with it. There is no question about us obeying the law.
I understand that, but you have to make a judgment is the point, don't you? You have to, as a Jehovah's Witness, you have to make a judgment.
Not with regard to the law in relation to things that don't conflict with Bible principles, because reporting child abuse at any level does not conflict with Bible principles, and we would happily comply.
I take it from what you've said in answer to His Honour's questions that you draw the distinction between those legal requirements of a government which are regarded as being in conflict with the Scriptures, which you will not observe, and that's why you gave the examples of Nazi Germany and Korea, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And those legal requirements which are in harmony with the Scriptures, which Jehovah's Witnesses will comply with.
Absolutely.
And that's the distinction that you seek to draw.
That's correct.
Thank you. Thank you, and I have no questions. No more questions.
Your Honour, I did have a question, but I note the time.
No, you ask your question.
Thank you, Your Honour. Well, I had 3, but I'll try to limit it, given the time. For the record, my name is Ms David, and I represent BCG. It's on this point of cooperation. This is with the other counsellors, psychologists, and persons who would assist victims. I just want to be clear that it is not just in circumstances when the victim or the parents of the victim raise that they want to go to the authorities, that you will advise them that it's their right to do so. Is it the case that you positively tell them that there are a variety of options and authorities that they may wish to speak to? Do you positively counsel them in that regard?
Well, again, I can't speak in the absolute, but my understanding would be that in every case we positively go to the parents and say, if you choose to, you'll have our full support. Do we go and say you must go to the police? We don't do that.
Well, I'm really asking you for somewhere in between there. It just concerns me with respect to some of the language you've used, that you would cooperate, you will, you respect their right if that's what they want to do. Do you tell them that that is an option that is available to them?
In every situation, to my knowledge, we do.
Right. And that is what you counsel the elders?
That's correct.
Right. And that is a new practice?
Why do you say that?
Well, I represent BCG.
Oh, so did the elders do that 24 years?
No, in fact, she has made a statement that she was instructed to the contrary when she raised it some years later with the elders, that she was in fact advised that she would be defellowshipped if she did, and other matters. But I guess what I'm concerned is that victims and their parents or guardians are aware not only that they have that right, but of persons who they might go to.
I think I've answered that question. Did that happen 24 years ago? I have no intention of disrespecting BCG's recollection.
Yeah. And just if I could seek the Commissioner's indulgence for a minute, just in relation to the issue of support, because what concerns me that in your statement, I'm not going to go to each paragraph, but on a number of occasions you have said that you take steps, you advise the elders to protect and support the victim. Again, I come back to BCG, but it is plainly clear from her statement that she did not feel supported and she did not feel protected through that process. Do you agree with that from having heard her evidence?
Do I agree that was what her evidence was? Absolutely,
Yes.
I heard it, yes.
And you heard from the elders that they believed that they gave her support.
I heard that too.
Well, there's a clear disconnect there, isn't there?
There's two different recollections.
Well, no. What I want to suggest to you, it's not a different in recollection. There is a clear disconnect, because while a well-meaning elder might believe that he has provided support, what it really highlights is that they are completely inexperienced and unable to provide the sort of support that a victim of child abuse needs. Doesn't that what that indicates? Isn't that what that indicates?
I think that's the longest question I've heard all day, but I think what I think what you're saying is if I had the power to be able to go back 25 years, I think...
No, Mr Spinks, no. What's being put to you is that this is not a question of recollection. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that the report from the survivor as to the way she felt, which is her own truthful account, is something which the elders obviously did not understand or appreciate. And that may be because of the limitations that old men, like me, might have in dealing with intimate allegations from a young woman about what has happened to them. Yeah. Do you understand the point?
I do, and I accept that. Yeah.
Well, accepting it's one thing, but then what's built into your process, if you accept it, is the risk in every case, when we're talking about abuse of this nature, that the survivor will feel unsupported and indeed may well be traumatised by the process. You understand?
I do.
And that's a very serious position for the Jehovah's Witness to be in, and a matter of concern to the Commission. Do you understand?
I do understand.
And that the case of BCG highlights that there are gross inadequacies in the way that the Jehovah's Witness congregation deal with these matters, notwithstanding their good intentions. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that they are clearly, from BCG's point of view, as an example, I'm sure representing many other victims, that change needs to occur to ensure that there is a comprehensive regime in place to look out for her, not that the elders don't have that capacity. Do you agree with that?
Again, it was such a long question, but if I understand the criticism, and I think again I would say I do understand what you're saying.
And that there needs to be that is an area that you need to look at seriously within your processes, and to ensure that you can properly support and protect a victim such as BCG.
And continually do so, continually reevaluate and accept those observations.
And to accept those observations, precisely.
Yep.
Yes.
I agree.
Thank you.
Your Honour, there is one matter I should put to Mr Spinks briefly. Mr Spinks, it's just in relation to your evidence in the last short while where you said that elders are informed to make sure that the survivor or victim's family are told that they have the absolute right to deal with it with the authorities. And if I can take you to your Shepherd the Flock handbook, that's tab 120 at page 131. And you explained earlier that this is looking at paragraphs 18 and 19. From here is what you explain, the generic advice you give, and it's based on what's written here. And you'll see in paragraph 19, just below the bold, it says, if you are asked, make it clear whether to report the matter to the authorities or not as a personal decision. And I suggest to you that that's where the truth lies. The truth, in fact, is that you tell your elders, if you are asked, make it clear that whether to report the matter to the authorities or not is a personal decision, and that it's not something that you tell them in every case, not something that the elders are instructed to tell the families in every case, that it's their absolute right to deal with the authorities. Do you accept that?
No.
Is that another document that needs to change then?
Yes, I think earlier, if I can, I recounted under oath what we do and what we say, and have acknowledged that we certainly need to put these references together and document what is actually done, and I apologise that that's not the case.
Very well, thank you for your evidence. You're excused. And we'll adjourn until 10 in the morning.
Disorder but of peace, as in all the congregations of the holy ones, let the women keep silent in the congregation, for it is not permitted for them to speak. Rather, let them be in subjection, as the law also says. If they want to learn something, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the congregation.
Well, do you follow that injunction or not?
If we read the whole chapter, I'm not suggesting that we do, but if we read the whole chapter, we'll see that the reason it starts with a God of disorder, not of disorder but of peace, is that there was disruption in the congregation, and the Apostle Paul, who I might mention was a single lawyer, spoke in a language that we would certainly phrase a little differently today. His point was, it was the role of the men to stand up and teach God's word from the pulpit to platform. And so do we try and over-literally interpret that? The Gospels are full of the women doing the preaching and sharing in the work in the congregation. That's just a really strong statement addressing a particular situation.
So you don't follow that one?
We do not have sisters who are elders teaching from the pulpit, but they are actively involved in speaking and discussions and question and answer.
That's the question. So the answer to my question is you don't follow that injunction?
Well, it's out of context, I'm sorry, Your Honour, because the context is the priest preaching from the pulpit.
All right.
Just on that, I think the transcript may have picked up the wrong reference. Is it 1 Corinthians 14?
No, I've lost it now.
I think the verses were wrong, 34 and 35.
33, 34 and 35.
Chapter 14.
14, yeah.
Thank you.
33, 34 and 35. I mean, there are other references in a similar vein, and you've probably travelled this territory many times, haven't you? Because, as you know, many churches don't interpret and apply those injunctions in the literal way that your church does.
That's correct.
You know that?
I do.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I do, Your Honour, if I may.
Well, who goes first?
All right, I do, I think.
All right. Okay, Ms McGlinchey.
Mr Spinks, my name is Miss McGlinchey and I represent Monty Baker in these proceedings. Mr Spinks, can I just ask, does the Jehovah's Witness Church conduct children's activities such as Sunday school or Bible classes for children?
No.
They don't?
No.
They don't have any child activities?
No.
Even creches?
No.
Childcare centres, anything like that?
No.
All right. So there's no activity where children are supervised alone with a Jehovah's Witness volunteer?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr Spinks, could you look at your first statement, paragraph 66? Just want to ask you some questions about the role of the regular pioneers. Now, as I understand it from the viewpoint of a lay person, a regular pioneer preaches in the community, in public. Is that correct?
Yeah, all of Jehovah's Witnesses preach publicly in the community. A regular pioneer is someone that says, I want to expand my ministry, but what you say is correct, yeah.
So they, the regular pioneers, may preach
Mission for showing great respect for our wives. I understand what you're saying in 21st century Australia for a religious or faith-based organisation to say that the men are going to be elders. I understand the challenge, but that's our scriptural stand.
But are you saying to me women can't be teachers in the church?
I think when that was discussed previously, if we're saying, as in a church situation, the priest at the pulpit or whatever, we understand scripturally that's the role of the elders. Are the women involved in teaching, in the public preaching work, in the bulk of the ministry? Yes, they are. They do the bulk of that work, but I'm not trying to...
Are they allowed to speak in the church?
I think anyone who's been to one of our congregation meetings would say a resounding yes to that.
Corinthians says they can't.
The context there is the elder, minister, priest standing up and giving a Bible lecture to the congregation. That's the role of the elders. The women, as with all others, non-elders, amongst the men, our children, they all participate, question and answer, commenting freely, and presentations off the platform.
We'll just look at 1 Corinthians 14, 34 and 35 for me. Have you departed from the scripture in your current practice?
Not at all, Your Honour. I think
Would you read them out so everyone knows what we're talking about?
34 and 35.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, you better start at 33, I suppose.
Okay. It says, for God is God, not a...
It's this, as I understand it, within your faith and you indeed as a person, if you saw someone breaking into your neighbour's house and your neighbour was away, first thing you would do is report it to the police, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's true.
And if you received reliable information, and I understand this is hypothetical, you've never been in this position, but if you received reliable information that a murder was planned, the first thing you would do is report it to the police.
That's true.
But if you receive a report that a child has been abused within a family, for example, in your community, you don't report it to the police. Now, can you explain the distinction? Why would that be?
Yeah, I would say again, as I read from the New South Wales booklet, as I strongly believe myself, as the scriptural principles highlight, we respect the rights of the individuals, the family, the survivor in the case of an adult, as in the two cases that have been considered, to make that determination. We've not said that we've had a procedure or process of automatically reporting it to the authorities. The Commission has brought to our attention that there, in addition to mandatory reporting, there are other legal implications to having that information. But I understand your point. Our process has been to respect the rights of the individual or the family. And I think, as has been previously quoted from 2 Corinthians 1:24, it says, "We're not the masters over your faith, we're fellow workers for your joy." And Galatians 6:5 says, "Each of us shall carry our own load of responsibility." So it's been mentioned that we control every aspect of family life. That's not the case. We respect the rights of families to make some of those decisions, but I do understand your point.
Well, is it not the case, Mr. Spinks, that it's because child sexual abuse is regarded as a sin within the Jehovah's Witness faith? It's a very serious sin, I'll grant you that, but it's regarded as a sin, but hasn't been recognised to be a crime.
Well, that's totally wrong. Not only is that printed, that we view child abuse as a sin and a crime. There is no worse sin and crime than child abuse. So I understand the basis for you expressing that, but that is totally the opposite to the truth with Jehovah's Witnesses.
No further questions.
Can you, Mr. Spinks, just help me to understand the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness Church? There are some fairly strict biblical New Testament injunctions about the role of women. Are they adhered to by your church?
I promise to give a short answer, Your Honour. We have such respect for our wives and women. We see scripturally that the role of teaching in the congregation is for the elders, for the men. Who does the bulk of the preaching work and adds the momentum? My wife, the other wives. We have a reputation